than it would be to apologize for quality forever. Now, I'll bet you're glad we made that decision, aren't you? I'm telling you, folks, I've sold a lot of merchandise with that particular close. It really does work. Let me emphasize a point. People do make emotional decisions. For example, we griped and complained when they started making us wear our seat belts in automobiles. I've never heard anybody gripe about wearing a seat belt in an airplane. And yet the truth is, if you have a wreck in a car with your seatbelt on, the odds are 3 to 1 that it's going to prevent more serious injury, perhaps even save your life. Now, on an airplane, 30,000 feet up, you got your seatbelt fastened, and that sucker comes down. I'm here to tell you that seatbelt's not going to do you any good at all. We do make emotional decisions. Now, again, if we can put emotional and logic together, we're going to be in business. Eb Jackson from Tucson, Arizona, is in the life insurance business, and he was telling me he used this very specific close to make the biggest sale of his career. And incidentally, he said he was kind of dragging bottom at that particular point. He called on this couple and made the presentation on the biggest contract he had ever offered. And the objection they brought up was simply the price is too high. And then Ab simply looked at them and lowered his voice and said, many, many years ago, our company made a very basic decision. They decided it would be easier to explain price one time than it would be to apologize for poor service for the rest of your life. I'm glad they made that decision, Mr. Prospect, and I'll bet you are too. Ab said it worked beautifully. Now, I'd like for you to please understand this. Every close won't work for everybody selling everything. Your experience, your judgment, and your common sense will be the determining factors. Now, you might be asking yourself, well, Ziegler, why do we need to know so many closes anyhow? Well, let me give you a basic reason for that. Dr. Herb True did some research at Notre Dame University. He discovered that only 4% of all of the salespeople in America will ask for the order 5 or more times. Now, I want to emphasize something. They do not necessarily ask those 5 times in the same interview. There are many presentations where, in fact, you do not ask for the order simply because you're gaining information so that you can make a legitimate proposal to them. When you're talking thousands and sometimes hundreds of thousands, even millions of dollars, you don't walk in, make a presentation very many times, and walk out with a multi-million-dollar contract, though it does happen, especially if you expect it to happen. But what Dr. True discovered was simply this. Those who ask for the order over a period of time, sometimes in one sitting, more often in 2 or 3 sittings, at least 5 times, those 4% closed over 60% of all of the sales, meaning simply that they made over 60% of all of the income. You got to ask for the order. When I first got started in selling, one of the first things I was told was you close early, you close often, and you close late. How many of you have ever been told that, especially when you first got started in selling? Yeah. Well, the question comes up, how early is early? Let me emphasize this as strongly as I can emphasize it. You never ask for the order until you have given them some legitimate logical reason for giving you a yes answer. If you've not given them value before you ask for the order, you come across as a high-pressure type salesperson. I want to get this over and move on to the next prospect. Now, that's one of the reasons you give that value first, because once the prospect has said no, a little barrier goes up. You can get over it, but it is more difficult than if the barrier had never been raised. So give value before you ask for the order. And that leads us into what I call is that fair enough close. You do build that value before you ask for the decision. But let me simply say this. It's okay it's even wise to let the prospect know in advance, maybe, that you're going to ask for the order. For example, years ago, things were slightly different than what they are today. When I was in the life insurance business, we used to do the fact-finding interview, and then we would go back with a proposal. And I would always have it in a beautiful folder. And when I went back, then I would take the proposal like so, and I would say, I have prepared a proposal for you. Then I would pull out a plain sheet of paper like so. And this is where I'm saying it's okay, it's even wise, particularly if you can go ahead and if you've done a lot of research before you get there and let them know in advance you're going to ask for the order. So I'd pull out this sheet of paper and I'd say, now, Mr. and Ms. Prospect, as you can see, I got a plain sheet of paper. There's obviously nothing there to explain. There's nothing there that you would not understand because there's nothing there. Here's a promise I'm going to make you. I'm going to promise you that when I finish this proposal to you, that it's going to be just as clear, just as plain as that blank sheet of paper is at this moment. And if it is that clear, and if it is that plain, then I'm going to ask you, if you see it is in your best interest to go ahead, I'm going to ask you this evening or this morning or whatever to make that decision. Is that fair enough? I'd like to inject a little extra right here. I would like to inject a clause I call simply the "you've got an answer for everything" clause. Now, here's what I mean. Sometimes you've answered several objections, and you've impressed the prospect with just how much you know about what you're talking about. And so many times, half in admiration and half in exasperation, the prospect will look at you and say, well, it doesn't make a difference what I say. You've got an answer for everything. How many of you have ever had somebody say that to you, all right? You're that close to making the sale, but you're that close to missing it. If you modestly admit that you were number one in the region last month, you just blew it. If a prospect says that, regardless of whether it's in admiration or exasperation, you quietly look them in the eye and you say to them, well, you know, I really appreciate that comment. I'm going to take it as a compliment. But the truth is there are many things I do not have the answer for. That's one of the reasons that I'm so excited about selling a product or service, which is the answer to your problem. And that's what you really want, isn't it? You convert it, you've now made it a very positive close. A number of years ago, I was traveling through St. Louis, Missouri. I was changing planes, had a little extra time, looked down at my shoes, realized I needed a shoe shine. Walked into the shine stand. Young man escorted me to my seat. He made the change for his previous customer. I had a chance to look at the prices of the shoe shine. 75 cents, this was about 12 years ago. 75 cents was the regular shine, $1 was the wax shine, and $2 was the spit shine. Well, I figured I'd get the regular shine for 75 cents, tip the guy a quarter, and I'd be on my way. He came to me, and incidentally, I called this the shame close. He came to me, and then he said, which one? I said, regular. Now, you're talking about voice inflection. The young man backed up and said, regular. Well, I knew right then I was in for an unusual shoe shine, but I wasn't about to let that guy get the best of me. So I said, yeah, you guys do such a marvelous job here. I know it's going to be fabulous, and I'll be on my way. Well, the guy didn't say a thing, didn't even grunt. He just started putting the saddle soap on my shoes, and he started cleaning them. And as he did, he said, man, these are really nice shoes. He said, what kind are they? I said, well, they're ballast. He said, boy, he said, they're nice. He said, I bet they're comfortable, aren't they? I said, they ought to be. He said, cost a lot of money. I said, do they ever cost a lot of money? And he went on cleaning the shoes, you know. Then he reached up and he felt the pant leg. And he said, man, he said, that is really a nice piece of cloth. And I said, well, it ought to be too. He said, what kind is it? And I said, well, it's a Hickey Freeman. He said, man, those suckers cost a lot of money. I said, yeah, I know they do, but this one's got some special cloth in it, makes it even more expensive. But I've already been wearing this suit about 5 years, and you still can't see any problem with it. Well, he said, man, he said, that's nice. And then he started the shining process, and he was just a shining away, and he was a popping, you know, and when they're popping, that's not shining. I shine shoes in the Navy. I know when you're shining shoes. Well, that's a sales talk. He's trying to attract the crowd from outside. So he was just a popping away, and all of a sudden he backed away, and he looked me right in the eye, and he said, you know, this seemed like a shame. Man will spend over $100 on a pair of shoes. Spend several $100s to get a nice suit of clothes. And all he's trying to do is look nice. Then he won't spend another $1 to get the best shine in the whole world. I said, spit on him, man. Spit on him. Well, now, folks, you know, when you get a 75-cent shine, a 2-bit tip, that's fine. But when you got a $2 shine, nobody with class gives a 2-bit tip. So I gave him a $3, you know, and as I walked out, you know, I was really picking them up and putting them down. I was feeling pretty good, you know. I looked up at the clock, and as I did, it clicked straight up and down 10 o'clock. Now, the reason I mentioned that is because when I sat down, I noticed it was exactly 3 minutes until 10. I was in his chair 3 minutes. I gave him $3. Now, you don't have to be a Phi Beta Kappa from MIT to figure that one out. That is $60 an hour. Did you realize that's what we were paying our psychiatrists back then? Of course, this guy does some good. But, you know, you might say, but Zig, he doesn't shine 20 pair of shoes an hour all day long. Okay, but you figure, let's cut that half in two. Instead of 60, he makes 30. Cut that half in two. He doesn't make 30, he makes 15. And you take $15 an hour and cut that half in two, and I know he does more than. You know what that adds up to? It adds up to right at $20,000 a year shining shoes. And I got something to tell you, friends. If that dude ain't making at least 30, ain't a dog in Georgia. I mean, he is shining a lot of shoes. But now let me point out two very sound things about him. His name is Johnny. I asked him his last name. I knew Johnny because it had his name on his name tag there. He said, I'm not going to tell you. If I tell you both names, you'll forget them both. If you'll always remember Johnny, though. He was a professional. He's the only shoeologist I've ever seen. Now, the reason I know he was a shoeologist, he had it right there on his name tag, Johnny, shoeologist. But let me point out a couple of things. He was a superb workman. He delivered everything he sold. That's important. Number two, he was a professional salesperson, and those two things merit it. But what I'm really saying is, if a gentleman in a job like that can make that kind of money, look at what we in the profession who have products and goods and services that extend to us infinitely greater opportunities, look what we can do. But the story doesn't end there. A few months later, I was back in the St. Louis airport. I walked in this time. There's no other shine guy around, no other customer. I'm the only one. Now, by then, they've changed the prices and structure just a little bit. It simply says, best shine, $2. I sat down, and he said, what kind? Well, I didn't want to go through that routine again, so I said, just give me your best. Well, as he was shining, I was bragging on him. You know, I discovered a long time ago that behavior which is recognized and rewarded is repeated, and so I wanted the best possible shine, so we had quite a little conversation. As a matter of fact, he got carried away, and he just kept shining, kept shining, kept shining, and finally I said, Johnny, I got to go. He said, okay, and he finished it up. As I stepped down, he said, you know, he said, I noticed you hung up an overnight bag when you sat down. I said, yeah. He said, you're spending the night in St. Louis? I said, yeah. He said, I was just wondering if you had another pair of shoes in your bag. And I said, well, as a matter of fact, I do. He said, you know, it'd really be a shame to have the best looking shine in St. Louis tonight and then just look like one of the gang tomorrow. He said, won't take me but a moment. I call that the extra clothes. Now, a lot of times as salespeople, we overlook the fact that we have other goods and products and services. We skim the surface, and leave more money on the table, more needs on the table that need to be met than we are actually reaching. Don't misunderstand. I'm not suggesting you try to sell everybody everything you've got every time you make that call on them. But they're buying, if you're selling products that you know they're buying from someone else, think of the time and effort you can save them if you can become more of a service person to them, selling them more of the things they're buying already anyhow. It is a service. You really can have everything in life you want if you will just help enough other people get what they want. Then I'd like to share with you what I call the marriage close. I was in the insurance business. One of the things that used to frustrate me, I'd spend a lot of time preparing a proposal and making the presentation. Get down to the close, and the prospect would say, well, Mr. Ziegler, I hate to tell you this, but my wife's second cousin's got a neighbor whose boyfriend's son, his dad, has a brother who is selling life insurance, and if we buy anything, we'll have to buy from them. Well, I knew it was just a stall. They weren't going to buy any life insurance from anybody. And so what I did then was simply this. I remembered a book I'd read by Frank Bettcher many years ago called How I Raised Myself from Failure to Success in Selling. This is the reason salespeople need to be students. They need to be learning all the time. It is a profession, and it's a profession that changes. And Frank Bettcher had a statement in his book, I would tell you this if you were my own brother. He also had another statement in there simply, this is what I would do if I were you. Now, what Frank Bettcher had done, he would make appointments before he ever made the call. For that prospect, he would say to the prospect, I can do something for you right now that no other insurance person in Philadelphia can do. And they would say, what's that? Well, I've made an appointment already for you to be examined tomorrow afternoon, promptly at 3 o'clock, by the only physician in Philadelphia who can give you agreement and approval right now that this amount of insurance is going to be placed in force. I stole a page from him, and I would say to the prospect, I can do something for you right now that no other insurance person in the world can do. Obviously, they'd say, what's that? I would say, I can marry you. The old boy would say, you would what? And I would reach over and I'd